go ahead and get started with the presentation. So today's objectives. One is just learn what is sync traffic control and how it keeps your team members productive and by avoiding sync conflicts. Number two here is learn how sync control keeps everyone syncing on a regular basis. And we're going to get into detail on how all these actually work here in a minute. And lastly, we're going to learn how to customize sync traffic control. So today's presenters is Parley, our founder of Guardian, and myself. And as usual, this is a office hours, so mics are live. And so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand before speaking and unmute yourself. And as always, the chats are monitored. And one of the most fun things about these office hours is seeing all of the, I guess, the Guardian fans out there in the chat, keeping the chat active and live. Our team is monitoring the chat. And so if you attended last month's webinar, you would have already seen this, is each of your team members have their own custom emojis that they're going to claim if you have a question, they're going to claim to respond that. Just to make sure we don't have multiple answers, multiple people responding and whatnot, kind of keeping things nice and succinct there and be able to answer your questions as quickly as possible. Now, whether it is a question raised in front of everyone or in the chat, some of these may require a little bit longer to respond and to kind of answer those questions. So we may push those back to the Q&A towards the end. And lastly, as always, these are being recorded and they will be provided on our website and on our YouTube channel. So with that being said, let's get into the actual good stuff here. All right, what is sync traffic control? So sync traffic control enhances Revit's native sync with central. It does this by keeping teams productive and models performing at their best. So we do this through an intelligent sync queue that helps prevent sync conflicts before they happen. In addition, you can create customized reminders to ensure people are frequently syncing. And if need be, also automate those syncs. With all of this, it keeps everyone's model current and keeps them clean. So why sync traffic control? So the first, sync conflicts. Out of show of hands here, how many people have frequently run into waiting for others to sync? And so when sync conflicts happen, the second person in line experiences a sync time twice as long as a typical sync. Now, you may be thinking, well, if the average sync time is 45 seconds, the person sitting there for a minute and a half, how bad could that really be, right? Well, a lot of times, a minute and a half is enough for someone to be distracted, right? They get up and go do something else. They open up their phone, and next thing you know, that minute and a half turns into 5 minutes. And now that continuation of the person would have continued to work had they been reminded to, or had been able to go back to work, they would have. So you see that first order of the time cost with a sync conflict, but then that second order adds up as well. The second is infrequent syncing. And so the other part of Guardian is to remind people to sync frequently. And so infrequent sync times leads to longer sync times and potential loss of work. So over the years, I come up with a little adage around this is users don't sync because it's slow, and it's slow because users don't sync. So Guardian is really meant to help prevent that negative cycle. You get people syncing more frequently, meaning their sync times increase, and then significantly reduce the potential loss of work or model corruptions that happen quite frequently with sync traffic control, or excuse me, with Revit sync with central. Right. In preparation today, we put together sort of the most common issues with Revit's sync with central, and we're going to go through these. And to be honest, I hate these long drawn out bullet point slides, so bear with me. I just thought this was really interesting. And just out of curiosity, I wonder, as we go through these, how many people, just with a thumbs up, have experienced these type of issues? So Network connectivity issues. So a lot of times if a individual or an office has slow speeds or latency issues, this impacts how quick or how successful Syncs with Central can be. And Guardian addresses this, maybe not in a direct way, but provides the data that people can use to see when there are issues with particular offices. We actually do hear from particular clients that from time to time, they will use this data and say, oh, we can see that this office has a much longer sync time than the others, or this individual may have longer sync times than others. And they are able to identify that that office has an issue, and they report that to their IT department where they can improve those speeds within those local offices or for that individual. All right, large and bloated models, right? So obviously the larger that model is, the slower the open times and the sync times happen. And this really happens by excess information getting into the model, right? So Guardian can help solve this by preventing those elements getting in the model in the first place, right? Like an imported CAD. An imported CAD is heavier than a linked CAD. So using Guardian's user commands will help inform people to make the correct decision to prevent those larger models to begin with. And the same thing with like families, is larger families and unused families helps, I guess, slow things down. And so by preventing those in the first place, will overall improve your sync times and your open times. Work sharing conflicts. So by syncing frequently, Guardian helps resolve those. Corrupt data, whether it's elements in the project, families, linked files. I've even seen corrupted materials. And sometimes when these families or materials get into a particular project, they can multiply into other projects as well. So Guardian can identify those and help purge those out before they become an issue. Improper workflows. So users forgetting to save to local before saving, or rarely syncing. As we discussed before, Guardian will help remind people to sync on a regular basis, and multiple users syncing all at once. Guardian addresses all of these. So simple thing as save locally before syncing. While Guardian doesn't have a feature that does that directly, Guardian's command messages that are associated with sync traffic control can help remind people to do that before doing so. And lastly here, when it comes to server IT setups, misconfigured Revit server, ACC, even desktop connector, all impact your performance of your syncing. And Guardian provides you the data to make sure that everyone is up to date and are consistently have the correct versions installed throughout your team. And lastly, a little pro tip here. What we've heard and what we've been able to find is that about 70% of sync failures actually comes down to workflow habits, not Revit itself. So Guardian with sync traffic control and its other features are really meant to kind of prevent these problems from happening that lead to sync failures. All right, one of the things we wanted to go over, and now that we've had Guardian for almost Guardian Sync Traffic Control out there for almost 2 years, to go over some of the numbers that we've observed over the years. So Guardian released Sync Traffic Control in September of 2023, but it really wasn't until spring of 2024 where we really started to see mass adoption across our client base. So since then, we've observed over 150 million syncs just through our existing clients. Over especially the last year and a half since spring of 2024, we've been able to identify over 700 sync conflicts. Now, of those 722,000 sync conflicts, almost 500,000 sync conflicts were prevented. So with that being said, let's pause here for a second and kind of think about that. Is if we assume that the average sync time across this 500,000 syncs was about 45 seconds, and I'd love to hear others what is your average sync time? Usually the bigger firms, we see it a little bit larger than that, but let's assume 45 seconds and a billable rate of $100 per hour. This equates to about $600,000 that Guardian Sync Traffic Control has saved our clients over the last year and a half. What we find is a lot of our clients find a ROI with Guardian just with Sync Traffic Control. And all the other features that Guardian provides is just icing on the cake. And one other interesting data point we found was, we're looking at these large numbers, then we go to 2.3 average sync snoozes. This just really gets into how a lot of people just don't like to sync, right? We've just been conditioned not to sync, and this just kind of shows that even with Guardian, people will tend to snooze if they're given the option. And when we go to the live presentation and go through how Guardian addresses a lot of the sync reminders, how all this can be customized. All right, with that being said, we're going to shift gears here. We have a guest today, Ryan Pratt with Populous. So Ryan started adopting a Guardian earlier this year and has had some interesting results with the use of sync traffic control. So with that being said, I'd like to invite Ryan to the presentation. Hello, Ryan. Yeah, I can hear you. So about how long have you been using sync traffic control at Populous?
So we got Guardian in January of this year, and we've spent about a month just collecting the sync data before we kind of turned it on these projects. So we turned it on in late February of this year, just to sort of get that control data to compare back to. We're only on like three or four projects at the moment, just with our Guardian package. But those projects have, I don't know, probably 15 models across all of them, with the main ones being really big projects like 500,000 square feet sports venue projects, with people in basically every time zone in the US.
Nice. So it sounds like you're using this on very large projects that are spread out geographically along a large footprint, with many individuals in the project. So before using sync traffic control, how did you manage your syncs?
The short answer is we didn't. We just used the default Revit sync traffic, not even traffic control, just the default sync from Revit. So it was not uncommon to see like reload latest ×5, ×6, ×7 on these bigger projects, to where I haven't personally seen this, but I've heard of a project a few years ago where they had a Excel file hosted in their Teams chat of everybody in the project broken down by like, you sync at 8:30, you sync at 9, down to that kind of level.
Well, that gives me heartache just kind of thinking about just trying to manage all that and being like, wait a minute, was it my time or someone else's time, and kind of keeping up to date. Now that you've been able to use sync traffic control for some time, now what are the benefits and ROI that you experience with it?
Let's just talk time first. Just on one of the bigger project that we're using it on, in our 50% issue week, sync traffic control prevented people from syncing over each other, the sync conflicts. It prevented 225 of those. So if it's 15 minutes per conflict, that's 56 something hours times a pretty modest assumption of $150 an hour. I don't actually know what the figure is, but I just picked that. That's $8,500 in 1 week. And I That's going to be what I point to when I have to go to my bosses next year and make the case again for re-upping. Like, it saved us more than it cost in just 1 week. That's doesn't get
that
more cut and dry than that.
and I'm just kind of mentally kind of freaking out here that you were experiencing 15-minute sync times. Wow, that's a lot of, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of downtime for your teams.
Yeah.
And so I would assume,
Most of those are probably less than that, but
yep.
some of them were definitely more. So,
But it's great to hear. It's great to hear that you basically saw an ROI in 1 week on just a handful of projects, just with sync traffic
and then
control.
the
I think
unquantifiable part of like there was no syncing related stress that week. Like we got it out the door by 12 on a Friday, which is unheard of.
that that's awesome. I mean, I imagine so many people here have experienced that where just can't sync. You're getting into lost data, model corruptions, and whatnot by all of the chaos associated with it, and you're not meeting your deadlines, right? I mean, ultimately, while there might be the financial side of that, there is also just the parents of not meeting deadlines, right? And be able to shift to be able to meet deadlines and prove to your team that, hey, we have tools to help us just, get the projects out the door. It's awesome to hear. What is the response that's from your team since you've started utilizing sync traffic control?
Um, I'll be honest, the buy-in from the team took a little longer than I was expecting, but once once it clicked for them, like once they lived with it for like 2 or 3 weeks, I would say that most of them probably couldn't imagine doing this project without it. Like it's just it takes away that worry from you that's kind of ever present if you don't have it of like I don't want to sync because I know this is going to take forever, but it's going to take forever because everybody doesn't sync. And I was able to show that before, once we turned it on, I was able to show to the team, you guys are all syncing much less frequently than you say that you are. Like, and we can prove that you're syncing maybe twice a day, which is not ideal.
Oh, and then that's something that's always really interesting, and especially with a lot of the other data that's provided with Guardians Backstage is the anecdotal information we receive from teams versus the reality are always misaligned. And I think this kind of segues to the next slide that I'm going to present in a second here. And knowing what those realities are is actually really important to understand how you fix things and where there's areas for improvement. And so I want to say you almost scared me for a second there when you're like, oh, it took a while for people to get turn around, to start to accept sync traffic control. But then when you said 2 to 3 weeks, I'm like, man, I would take that in a heartbeat for people to start seeing the upside in that amount of time. All right, Ryan, really appreciate you joining us today and presenting and sharing your perspective and the things that you've learned with sync traffic control. Thank you so much for joining
For
us.
sure. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right. As I mentioned, we're working with another client who's been utilizing Guardian for about the last 5 months now, and they've been utilizing it for about 220 users. Over those 5 months, they have seen that there has been about a little over 25,000 total active hours in the model. And what we mean by active hours, meaning users are actively working the model. It's not the model isn't sitting idle, but and as they do other things, this means they are actively picking and clicking in the model for those 25,000 hours. Now, of that 25,000 hours, they have identified that 11.6% of that time is spent opening their models. And then another 6.3% of their time is dedicated just to syncing the models. So when we start looking at that, that means that's that is almost an 18% time where Revit is just churning, right? The users aren't actively in the being productive in those models. And we start providing a dollar figure to that. Again, let's use the $100 per hour. Is over that time, they experience sort of a $452,000 loss of productivity because of Revit just churning, trying to open a model, trying to sync a model. That's a lot of lost productivity. So here's a little screenshot, and we'll talk more about Guardian Backstage. But this is some of the typical data that you'll see that comes out of sync traffic control and presented in Guardian Backstage. So with that being said, I'd like to shift gears here and hand it over to Parley, where we're going to get into a live demo, and we're going to do some live syncs along the way. So it's always a risk when we try to do things live here, but we're excited to start sharing sync traffic control. Take it away, Parley.
Thank you, Chris. Share my window here. Are you able to see this?
Not yet.
Click the wrong option. All right. How about now?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Chris, for setting the stage here for the demo. Yeah, I do want to step back just quickly and perhaps remind or reiterate or emphasize that all of sync traffic control is actually compatible with just all versions of Revit, all forms of work sharing, and of course, like it's been implied, works anywhere you are. So in the demonstration today, we've got members of our team spread out across the US. I'm actually in Hawaii at the moment, so a little bit of a different space. So this is always fun for us to be reminded of how this works across the globe, and exciting as well. I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the configuration of this sync traffic control. I'm mindful that a lot of the attendees are probably already aware of some of this, but we do have a number who haven't seen this yet. So we're going to start with just some of the basics, how it's configured, and then how that works in normal operation with the users. And then we're going to go into some situations that are a bit more obscure that can, even if you're familiar with sync traffic control, I think explain a lot of maybe some of the things you've been seeing that are like maybe not as obvious, like why did it not remind the user and when a reminder was expected, things like that. So we'd like it to be interactive. Chris, chime in, fill in the gaps here as we go. But
yeah, before we get too far, I saw that Paul had his hand raised. So why don't we open up to Paul and
Oh, I just realized I bumped it by mistake. I didn't actually have a question.
No worries, no worries. Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. So we are in a model. I just want to point this out. This was kind of fun. Our team's been using this model for demonstrations, and we finally decided to name this project. This is our Guardian Consistency Cafe. So let us know what you think of that. But basically, when we go into the project configurations, these are configurations which are applied across your registered projects. And one of the interesting things as we scroll to the bottom here, everything is within the sync traffic control feature. This is actually very unique in the list here, in the sense that changes made to the enablement or disabling and the settings within are actually synchronized live across those projects where the configuration is assigned. That is not the case with any other aspects of these configurations, and it has to do with really the nature of this feature. Everything else is kind of cached when the models are opened and things like that. And that's done for performance. But the settings of this feature are actually pushed out dynamically across your projects. What's kind of fun and interesting about this feature is you can have multiple projects opened at a time in one session of Revit, and those hypothetically could have different configurations applied. So as we demonstrate all of the complexities of the system, keep in mind that it's also managing this across your projects as you toggle between those in a single session. All right, so coming in here, once it's enabled, and basically we have this dialog here. It's very, I think we did a pretty good job of providing some simple options for the settings, and then handled a lot of the intelligence behind the scenes. Somebody's thinking there in the background. But at the top here, this is kind of broken into thirds in my mind. The top portion here, down to this button or this menu, has to do with what you want Guardian to do when a conflict is recognized. And you have three options here, very similar to the other parts of Guardian, where you can monitor, guide, and prevent. Guidance and prevention being the two modes that provide a user experience, something that's not just simply monitoring in the background. So guide and prevent, if you choose one of these two options, what that does mean is a different user experience when users synchronize the model. If they use the sync and modify settings option when syncing, they will indeed see a different dialog. We are actually replacing Revit's own sync dialog with our own. You'll see that. That being said, we are actually not, and this is just good to understand, I think, we are not actually doing anything with the sync itself. Sometimes that's a misconception. If something happens wrong with the sync itself of your models, that is still very much a part of Revit. We're simply invoking the sync command and watching for that to finish. So that is these three options. And as conflicts happen, if Chris is syncing and I try to sync, and I try it, I'm going to get a prompt that says, "Hey, Chris is already syncing," and I'm able to add myself to a queue.
One thing I'd like to add there, Parley, is one of the things we see, especially with new users of Guardian, is they're like, "Oh, I don't want to prevent a sync conflict," right? There's an interpretation sometimes they're preventing a sync. No, this is just preventing a sync conflict. So sometimes they'll put the protection mode into guide, but guide actually allows users to, if they choose to do so, to induce a sync conflict. So we actually recommend actually going from monitor to prevent rather than kind of skipping guide sometimes, because just to be able to actually prevent the sync conflict to begin with.
True, yes. And if you're just starting with Guardian, everything defaults to that monitor state. So if you're relatively new with us, go ahead and give that a try. As you've heard from a few others today, you can run this on just individual projects through the assignment of these configurations.
And coming back to that 722,000 sync conflicts identified that we had on the previous screen, that delta between the 500 and 722,000 really comes down to firms who have sync traffic control set to monitor. So
true, yeah, and a lot of those would be, single user projects, I believe, right? Some of those could be. I could explain some of that difference in ratio.
Yep.
The next group here is the reminder settings. So we're kind of changing gears. This is the ability of Guardian to prompt the users to synchronize. When this is enabled, it actually replaces Revit's own reminders that you might have might be enabled through the INI settings. And what's different about Guardian's reminders, apart from its customization layer, is it's also based on active time. So rather than just being based on your system clock and it just kind of always reminding users after 30 minutes or whatever it is, this is keeping track of active time of each opened model. So toggling over to Outlook or internet, something like that would actually pause that active time. And what happens is once that active time is met, the user receives a prompt. In this case, they'll get a prompt after 1 hour. They do have an option to snooze that. If they do, their next reminder would be after 15 minutes of active time and then 5 minutes. What's neat about this, you can keep adding more intervals if you want, taking away, completely up to you. But you can also enable some options here for after the cycle completes. We can toggle this, and that's going to automatically synchronize the model after that last reminder. But if the user happens to be present on the machine, they would be able to keep snoozing that every 5 minutes if you don't have this next checkbox enabled. So if that's enabled, they're done. After that 5 minutes is done, it's going to automatically sync for them, or they can just click the sync button as well. And now they're kind of restarted to the top of that cycle. A couple other options here that are really neat. Guardian is keeping track at the whole project level, how many times have been synchronized before it's been compacted. So this is not just per user. This is actually, you know, collectively, how many syncs have been completed before compaction. So if you want Guardian to just automatically check that box when synchronizing every 50 times, just turn that box on. You have options there as well. And then this will make more sense when we do the demonstration, but it's currently set to 1 minute. So when users get reminders, they have basically 1 minute of reserved time where they can initiate that sync.
And I see a question by Steve. If you don't mind.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I was just wondering, in your opinion, we have a very large project. The model is over 1 gigabyte, and there are often 30 people working in it. And it gets bloated quickly, so we like to compact a lot, but of course people hate being selected to be compacted. What sort of happy medium would you suggest as a setting for there? I mean, what kind of guidance can you provide with the 50, 100, 200 options that you have? What's the rationale for those numbers, or any guidance on what to select?
That's a good question, Steve. I think it's true. It's not always too transparent about who that next person is, right? So someone could stumble into this compaction. The numbers here that we've used have been from some feedback we got during the beta testing of this. If it's compacting too often, I would probably change it to a higher number, and then you just by changing it to a lower number. Let's say it's on the 120th sync and you're set to 200. You could basically drop it down to 100, hit OK, and then like tell the next person, hey, your next one's going to compact. Apart from that, you know, if there's something else we can improve here, we're open to hearing it. Anything you'd add to that, Chris?
I think you put it just right, is when you start getting more and more people in the model, that means, and you start looking at average syncing, 5 to 6 syncs per day. These will add up pretty quickly. So increasing that frequency, or say decreasing the frequency to every 200 would kind of spread that out.
Yeah. This definitely would depend on how many users you have in the model, in my opinion.
Yep. And in addition, while this can be customized within the project configuration, this is also where you can go into the file settings and customize it on a model by model basis, right? So something to think about as well.
And thanks. That was kind of the exact opposite of how I was thinking about it. In my mind, with a big model and lots of people in it, I wanted it compacted more often. So I was going down to the 20 and 50. But that's probably what's leading to complaints, that people feel like they're the one being picked on all the time.
Yeah,
Should be.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it is always a balance of kind of managing maybe what's best for the model and the BIM manager and what's best for that end user experience. So
Cool.
thanks, Steve.
Yes, thank you. So for this demo, I'm going to keep this Project Central dialog opened. And, I would make that suggestion as well. This is a really great, I'd make the suggestion for you and your teams. It can be a very nice way to keep an eye on who's in the model and what the sync status is of everybody. So a little plug for Project Central there, as well as the timeline. You can change this to your project sessions and see a nice little graph of everybody's session line with the black ticks showing when everybody has synchronized. So that's also really nice. But to demonstrate this, let's go ahead and have one on my team begin to synchronize. Maybe Chris, if you want to hit sync there. And what we'll do is see Chris's status here change to a waiting for user and then synchronizing. And if I try to sync at that time, this is the conflict that we've been harping on so much on today's call. I do have to have a password before I can continue because it is currently set to prevent. And so now I'm not able to synchronize. So my only option, unless I have a password, is to click add to queue or cancel. And if I add myself to the queue, I become a pending user here. And so we're waiting for Tanner. Tanner, thank you for jumping in there and synchronizing. Next would be Mitch, and then I'll be right after that. Okay, so you can see this all quickly becoming pending in real time. And as soon as Tanner's done, it will become Mitch, and then ultimately on me to synchronize. Okay. As soon as this queue clears up, I'll just show you kind of the just the regular sync experience. I guess I jumped that step in this demo, but at least we got to see what a conflict looks like. And then after that, we'll show you how, as an admin, you can remind your users to sync. I can move myself to the front, but I'm already kind of in the front. And now I have my turn to synchronize. Now, I might not be ready yet to synchronize, so I might be kind of in the middle of a design or some part of my workflow. I might just say, yeah, let next user sync. And what that does is it's going to jump now to Chris. Will become Chris's turn, and I'm just one down from there. I haven't compromised much of my position in this queue, and everything looks pretty good.
One thing I'd like to add there is you initially saw that there was the timer that was counting down. And here you can see with Parley here, automatically synchronize in 53 seconds. So in this situation, because Parley has already asked to sync, Guardian is going to automatically sync them when it becomes their turn, unless they hit sync or snooze. Alternatively, if it was just a regular sync reminder, and I could show this here in a second, is Parley would have an option to snooze, and it would automatically snooze as long as that setting we demonstrated to not automatically sync after the last reminder times out. And so those little nuances are really important here.
Yep, that's right. I'm going to cancel this, and if we have Karen cancel that prompt and Jake as well, we'll just show you what that initial prompt looks like as a user. Okay, so like I said, we've kind of taken over the Revit dialog. So this is basically saying, yeah, it's free, you can synchronize. Because I have asked to synchronize, it will automatically synchronize. So I could walk away from my computer now and it would sync in 40 seconds. Just want to highlight, we do have the advanced options that are typically seen on that Revit dialog. We just felt like some of those are a little bit more beyond what users think about. So we've collapsed them by default. And this is the box that Guardian is checking for us automatically, apparently. So
It's your turn to
I'm
compact.
no, yeah, I won't do that today. Not right now. So that's kind of the basic workflow. This is a reminder. I think somebody must
I
have
did.
clicked on my name. Okay, thank you. Yeah, clicked on my name and clicked Remind to Sync, so that you can, as an admin, also kind of take somebody's scheduled reminder. You know, I could ask Tanner by clicking on him, Remind to Sync. If he chooses to synchronize, he is then going to be prompted with this reminder, which of course he can snooze. But what that does is kind of jump that user into the next level of their reminder sequence. So essentially, if you have automatically sync enabled on that settings dialog, as an admin, you can kind of force a user to sync in a way by just hitting this 1 or 2 or 3 times until they get to the bottom of that sequence, and they'll be forced to sync. Okay. Again, this has really been helpful for teams to have enabled for their users on those large project teams, especially just kind of eliminate some of the guesswork of what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and just to reiterate here, with Project Central, this is available to all users. What a lot of firms will do, just because there's maybe information in Project Central they don't want everyone to see, they will limit Project Central to only sync traffic control and messages. So they can place this on a second monitor and kind of keep tabs in real time how people are syncing.
Yeah. And they can toggle this checkbox, and this just kind of opens up every time Revit opens. And yeah, really easy. Anything else to demonstrate in Revit, Chris, that you can think of? We talked about move to front.
Yeah, I think we've covered all the bases here, and I think your next slide will get into some of the unique situations that arise from time to time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then let's go ahead and get back over here to PowerPoint.
Perfect.
So,
okay. Yes. So as we have onboarded teams and supported teams with this feature, it's been clear that for some people, sync traffic control can appear to have kind of an intelligence behind it, but it's not always clear what it's doing. So we wanted to kind of get to the bottom of some of those questions and help you understand a little bit more behind the scenes. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. A blank status, if reminders, so sometimes you see like just nothing in that status column of Project Central. And what that means most likely is that reminders are not enabled. What it could mean if everyone else has a reminder, but 1 or 2 or more users are left as blank, that could mean that they have opened Revit but are stuck on a dialog prompt, like Guardian's workset selection prompt. If you have that enabled and users are just kind of hanging out on that prompt, they're going to show up without a reminder being scheduled yet. Okay. It also means, and we've had this question come up, if reminders are not enabled or that next reminder isn't scheduled for a user, basically that remind button that you saw in Project Central that appears for admins, that is not enabled just because the reminder system isn't turned on. So that's why if it's disabled. If a user hasn't been very active yet, so like I said, a reminder will pop up after that time if of active time. So let's say I'm scheduled for noon and noon arrives, but I've only met like 40 minutes of active time. At that moment, Guardian checks how much time has been utilized. Well, we have 20 minutes left. So at noon, the reminder is rescheduled for like 20 minutes after that, 12:20, okay? And you're still in that same first interval. You haven't jumped yet to that next interval yet. So it kind of just keeps kicking the can down the road until that active amount of time has been met. And sometimes that's been hard for users to understand. They see this reminder time, it arrives, and they're like, yeah, I never got a reminder. Well, that's probably what's going on behind the scenes. It's just that active time. Now, the question also comes up if a user is busy when that reminder comes, and busy could mean a few different things. They could be just simply in the middle of working, right? They're just in the middle of something. Like you saw in our demo, there is the option to snooze. And so if they want to click that, they do move into that next interval of their reminder sequence. If they're in kind of a blocking situation, like a dialog is opened or they're in the middle of a command, basically that reminder is not able to appear. And so for other users, and looking at the Project Central status column, that user would appear as being blocked. Okay, and so as soon as the user closes the dialog, they would get the reminder, assuming that nobody else is syncing already at that time. That's kind of the cool thing about these reminders is it's smart enough to not remind somebody to sync if the queue is already being utilized. And if they're away from the computer, then yes, it would step into the next sequence of their reminders with a caveat, and this is coming into number 4, in fact, only if there has been work completed already, something to be synchronized. If not, it's just going to keep that user rescheduling a reminder within that first interval.
Hey, Parley, if we don't mind pausing here for
Yep.
a second, I see Steve has his hand raised. And Steve, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure.
Yeah, one more question. Parley, when you were showing the example of syncing and you opened the advanced settings that is normally collapsed, I noticed that you did not have save to local before and after checked. And I'm curious about that when earlier at the very beginning of the presentation, one of the bad items listed was people not saving to local before syncing.
Good question. That option was, it might have not been clear in my screen capture. It is disabled, meaning it is grayed out, but the box is still checked. It's actually a little bit subtle that the box is checked. We basically force that to be enabled when syncing.
How do you do that?
We do it through the API. When we send the request, we're telling it to save local before and after.
Thanks, Steve. Good question.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're kind of highlighting here is there is a difference between the reminder schedule and being in the queue, and it's been kind of implied, but I just want to reiterate, just because a user shows up in the list in that Project Central dialog doesn't mean they're in the queue. If a user shows a time in that status column, that just simply means that they have a reminder schedule, but it doesn't mean they're in the queue necessarily. In the queue means that the user has basically their reminder has come due, or they have basically clicked to synchronize and they've added themselves to the line who are intending to synchronize. And we get questions sometimes, what do these different statuses mean? Waiting for user basically means that like green countdown part of the dialog is counting down. That is the user's position. That's their open time to begin synchronizing, reserved for them. And syncing, obviously they're just in the middle of the sync process. Guardian is also able to understand if the user encounters a Revit warning during the sync. And for that, you would see a little like warning icon next to that word syncing. And that's what that means. And when that happens, it actually will allow the next person in the queue to continue with the sync. We've had situations where people walk away, the error pops up, and that kind of held up the queue for as long as the user was away from their machine. So that's kind of a cool little improvement we made. Blocked, like I mentioned, means that the user has a dialog opened of some kind where they're in the middle of a command. And so when that happens, the position is given up to the next user automatically, and they just kind of switch positions. And pending means that you're just simply in line to sync. Okay. And then if the user is busy when you're next in line, again, this is kind of similar to number 3 above in the reminder. You could be in the middle of working. So on that dialog, you have an option to allow the next user to sync, which again, you just kind of switch positions with that next user. And you could be in the middle of a block situation, which just as soon as you're out of that block situation, you're basically next in line. Or if you're away from the computer, Guardian will sync automatically for you. We've talked about this little tip here. And the next little prompt here, this is actually new with Guardian 328, where if a user is in that kind of blocked situation, Guardian's a little bit more proactive to the user, letting them know like, hey, we're trying to sync. As soon as you hit escape a couple times or close out of the dialog, you'll get that prompt.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add here is this is new with 328. I just remind everyone, just remind your users to read the prompts. We put a lot of direction in here, and so a lot of users will just like, oh, I see a pop-up, and don't actually read what's happening here. So the idea here is to help communicate. It's actually someone has an active command when they hit the sync button, and they need to exit that active command.
Let's go to the next slide here, Chris. I'm keeping an eye on the time.
Yep.
Just a plug for the data behind all of this. I'm glad that it was brought up earlier that, you know, data approach, an approach to showing data about like who's syncing and how often and everything like that. This is where that's coming from. And we did a webinar recently where we went really in depth with Guardian Backstage. So just wanted to bring this up that you can view very in-depth information and insights about how many syncs per user, when with that heat map or user syncing the most often, how long are the syncs taking, does it look like the sync finished or not, how long were the syncs. So really good way to just understand where you have problems and how to address them.
One thing I like to quickly add here is you can see for sync conflicts, that's the blank. And hypothetically, if you're using sync traffic control and have it set to prevent from the very beginning, you would not have any sync conflicts. So blank actually means 0 in this case. So that's really the goal. And partly, if you want to take this one on.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that first one was about syncs. This is about sessions, which is also related to synchronizing, right? This is charting out every user's model session over time. And so we find that when users leave their model open for extended periods, it can cause issues with syncing. So just a really nice place to look across the board at where you have those users with those habits.
And lastly here is some of the resources surrounding sync traffic control. One is the sync traffic control user guide. So this is available on Guardian's website for download. And in addition, our sync traffic control knowledge base. So this gives you a lot of the in-depth information that was provided here today, and also some how-to videos. All right. That being said, let's, with the last few minutes we have here, let's open up to any questions that people may be having. Or I'll ask my teammates, has there been any questions within the chat that is relevant to kind of speak more broadly to?
There was one a bit earlier that I pinned. Trying to find it. There it is, by Steve Jensen. Does Guardian report sync times? Do Guardian reported sync times include the save to local, reload latest, sync to central, and then save to local?
I'll have to check, but I believe it's the entire process. It's everything.
I can confirm that it is not those individual segments of those processes. So, but that is a question that we get quite a bit, wanting to know how long it takes to do the saves versus the actual sync. And even the upload or reload latest versus the other. Good question. All right. Doesn't appear to be any more questions, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, the recording of this webinar will be provided on our website and on our YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe to get those updates. All right, I want to thank everyone for attending, and thank you, Ryan Pratt, for being our guest today. And thank you, Party, for joining while on vacation.